He wasn't supposed to make it to sunrise, not in this room, not with the quiet hum of machines counting down what little time he had left, and yet Rex was still breathing, shallow and uneven, his chest rising just enough to remind everyone that something inside him refused to let go, the sterile scent of antiseptic hanging thick in a small veterinary clinic just outside Kingston, Ontario, where the early winter light pressed faintly against the frosted windows, pale and distant, as if even the sun had decided to keep its distance from endings like this. Daniel Mercer stood near the edge of the table, shoulders heavy beneath his worn navy coat, boots still dusted with salt from the icy sidewalks outside, his breath slow but unsteady, the kind of breath that comes when a man is trying not to break in front of strangers. He had faced storms harsher than this, nights colder than -20, calls that came in without warning and never ended the same way they began, but nothing in all his years as a police officer had prepared him for this kind of silence, the kind that waited between one heartbeat and the next. Rex lay there, his once sleek black and rust coat dulled by weeks of illness, muscles that had once carried him over fences and through narrow alleys now still and fragile, his ears barely lifting at the sound of Daniel's voice. "Hey, partner," Daniel whispered, the words catching in his throat like something too heavy to carry all at once. He reached out slowly, fingers brushing against Rex's neck, feeling the faint warmth beneath the thinning fur, and for a moment, the world shrank to that single point of contact, a man and his dog, nothing else, not the diagnosis, not the quiet conversations behind closed doors, not the word terminal that had settled into the room days ago like a shadow no one could move. The veterinarian stood nearby, gloved hands resting lightly against the edge of the counter, her expression calm but watchful, the syringe prepared, a final kindness measured in milliliters and mercy. She had done this before, many times, each one different, each one the same, but something about the way Rex's eyes remained half open, fixed not on the ceiling but on Daniel, made her hesitate, just for a second longer than usual. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires crunching over packed snow, the sound distant, almost forgotten. Daniel leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching Rex's. "You've done enough," he murmured, voice low, steady, but beneath it there was something else, something that trembled like ice before it cracks. Rex's breathing shifted, barely noticeable, a slight pause, then a deeper inhale, as if pulling something from far away, and then, against everything the room had prepared for, he moved, not much, not fast. Just enough to lift his head and press it forward, his body trembling under the effort, muscles protesting with every inch, until he reached Daniel, until his front legs, weak and uncertain, found their way up, resting against Daniel's chest, and for a moment, time stopped, the machines, the air, even the light seemed to hold its breath. Rex leaned into him, not with strength, but with something older than strength, something that had been built over years of quiet patrols, long nights, shared silences, his head tucked beneath Daniel's chin, his body shaking, and then came the sound, soft, broken, not quite a whine, not quite a breath, but something deeper, something that didn't belong to pain alone. Daniel froze, arms instinctively wrapping around him, holding him close. "Easy, easy," he whispered, but his voice was no longer steady. There was a crack in it now, something giving way. Rex didn't pull back, didn't relax. He held on, as if there was something left to say that words could never carry, and across the room, the veterinarian's hand hovered midair, the syringe suspended between decision and doubt. Because she had seen dogs at the end, she had seen them let go, grow still, grow quiet, but this was different. This was intention, this was urgency wrapped in weakness. Her eyes narrowed slightly, shifting from Daniel to the monitor, then back to Rex. Something didn't align, not fully, not yet. And in that suspended moment, with winter pressing gently against the glass and a man holding on to the last piece of something he couldn't replace, the room began to change, not loudly, not all at once, but in the smallest, quietest way, like the first crack of light before dawn. Something unseen, something waiting, had just begun to move. The room did not move, but something inside it shifted, subtle and undeniable, like the air before a storm that never quite arrives. The way you expect. Daniel felt it first, not in his thoughts but in his grip, the way Rex held on, not fading, not loosening, but pressing closer with a fragile urgency that did not belong to a body preparing to let go. His hands tightened instinctively around the dog's frame, feeling each shallow breath, each tremor that carried more than just weakness. "I am here," he whispered, softer now, The words barely louder than the rhythm of Rex's breathing, and yet Rex did not settle, did not surrender to the quiet. Instead there was a tension, a faint pull, as if something inside him resisted the stillness that everyone else had already accepted. Across the room the veterinarian stepped closer, her movements measured, careful not to disrupt the fragile moment unfolding before her, but her eyes had changed, no longer resigned, no longer simply compassionate. There was focus there now, a question forming that refused to be ignored. She watched the way Rex's chest moved, uneven but deliberate, the way his head pressed into Daniel's shoulder, not collapsing, but holding, as if he needed to stay awake just a little longer. "Wait," she said quietly, the word not loud, but firm enough to pause the world again. Daniel lifted his head slightly, confusion flickering through the grief in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough, unsure whether to hope or to brace for something worse. The veterinarian did not answer immediately. Instead she reached for the monitor. Checking the readings again, her brow tightening as she traced the patterns that did not quite match what she had expected from a dog in this condition. "His vitals are not declining the way they should be," she murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. Rex shifted again, a small movement, but intentional, his body tensing briefly before relaxing, and then that sound returned, soft and broken, like a breath catching on something unseen. Daniel felt it against his chest, felt the vibration travel through the thin barrier of fur and bone, and something inside him stirred, something buried beneath weeks of acceptance and quiet resignation, a memory he could not quite place, a feeling that something was not finished yet. "He has been like this for days," Daniel said slowly, searching for the right words, "restless, especially at night, like he is trying to tell me something, but I thought it was just the pain." The veterinarian glanced at him, then back at Rex, her mind moving quickly now, piecing together fragments that had not seemed important before. The initial scans, the shape of the mass, the way it had appeared dense, unusually defined for what had been assumed to be an aggressive growth. She stepped back slightly, lowering the syringe onto the tray with a soft metallic sound that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. "I want to take another look," she said, more certain now, her tone steady but carrying a weight that had not been there before. Daniel blinked, the words taking a moment to settle. "Another look," he repeated, as if testing the possibility, the idea that this moment might not be the end after all. Rex's grip weakened just slightly, not from surrender, but from exhaustion, his head still resting against Daniel, his breathing still shallow, but his eyes, half-lidded, remained focused, present, as if waiting, always waiting. The veterinarian moved toward the imaging room, already reaching for the controls in her mind, replaying the earlier scan, the angles, the shadows. Something had been off. She had felt it then but had dismissed it, trusting the pattern she had seen so many times before. But now, standing in the quiet aftermath of a moment that refused to follow the script, she could not ignore it any longer. "Give me a few minutes," she said, turning back briefly. "Do not let him go just yet." Daniel nodded. Though he had no intention of doing otherwise, his arms still wrapped around Rex, holding him as if the act alone could anchor them both in place. Outside the window the light had shifted slightly, the pale morning beginning to take shape over the frozen streets, and inside, in the stillness between what was expected and what might yet be revealed, something fragile had begun to take root, not certainty, not even hope, but something quieter, something that lived in the space between doubt and belief, waiting to be seen. The minutes stretched in a way that did not feel like time at all, more like a held breath that refused to release. Daniel remained seated beside the table, one arm supporting Rex's frail body, the other resting gently along his back, tracing slow, steady lines through the thinning fur as if the motion alone could keep him anchored. The clinic had grown quieter now, the earlier sounds of movement fading into a distant hum, leaving only the soft rhythm of Rex's breathing and the faint ticking of a wall clock that seemed louder with each passing second. Outside, the morning had fully arrived, pale sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered pavement, casting a muted glow through the frosted glass. But inside, the light felt different, as if it had not yet decided whether it belonged to an ending or a beginning. Rex shifted slightly, his body pressing closer into Daniel's chest, his strength fading in small increments, yet his presence remained, alert in a way that did not match the weakness in his limbs. Daniel lowered his head, resting it gently against Rex's, his eyes closing for a brief moment, not in surrender, but in memory, because silence like this always opened doors to the past, whether you wanted it to or not. And suddenly he was no longer in this room, no longer Surrounded by white walls and quiet machines, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere colder, darker, a night that had never quite left him. It had been late, well past midnight, the kind of hour when the city feels like it is holding its breath, a thin layer of frost covering the streets of Kingston, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. Daniel had been at home, sitting at the small kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee growing cold in front of him, Rex lying near the door, ears alert even in rest, because that was who he was, always listening, always watching, always ready. The house had been quiet, but not empty. There had been warmth there once, laughter that lingered in the walls, a presence that made even the smallest space feel full. Daniel's gaze drifted then, as it often did, toward the small shelf near the window, where a delicate object rested beneath the soft glow of a lamp. A photo locket watch, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. Its silver surface worn smooth by years of touch, inside it held something far more valuable than metal, a photograph, tiny and carefully preserved, of a woman whose smile had once been the center of his world, Claire Mercer. Her name still carried a weight that never seemed to lessen, even after time had done its quiet work. Rex had always been drawn to that shelf, not out of curiosity, but something deeper, as if he understood its importance without ever needing to be told. That night, the calm had not lasted, it rarely did. The sharp ring of Daniel's phone had cut through the stillness, sudden and urgent, a call that did not ask, only demanded. His posture had changed instantly. Years of training settling over him like a second skin, he had answered without hesitation, his voice steady, focused, listening to instructions that came fast and clear. There had been an incident across town, assistance required immediately, no time to waste. Daniel had stood, already moving, already reaching for his coat, his mind shifting from quiet reflection to action. Rex had risen at once, stepping forward, ready to follow, but Daniel had paused, just for a moment, placing a firm but gentle hand against Rex's side. "Stay," he had said, the command soft but certain. Rex had hesitated, his eyes searching Daniel's face, reading something there that words could not fully convey, but he obeyed, because that was the bond they shared, trust without question. Daniel had grabbed his keys, his radio, and without a second thought, he had stepped out into the cold night, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality that he did not recognize at the time, because some moments only reveal their weight long after they have passed. And as the memory lingered, blending with the present, Daniel's grip on Rex tightened ever so slightly, a faint unease settling into his chest, because somewhere between that night and this moment, something had been left unfinished, something that Rex, in his quiet, unwavering way, had never forgotten. The memory did not fade the way most do, it sharpened, drawing Daniel deeper into a night he had never truly left behind. The cold had been sharper than usual, the kind that settled into your lungs with every breath, turning the air brittle. His truck tires had crunched over the frozen road as he drove across town, the radio crackling with fragmented updates, nothing clear, only urgency, always urgency. When he arrived, the street had already begun to gather attention, distant lights reflecting off windows, a quiet tension in the air that told him something was wrong before anyone said a word. He stepped out into the cold, boots hitting the pavement with purpose, his breath visible in short bursts as he moved quickly toward the scene. A modest home stood ahead, its silhouette dim against the night, but something about it felt off, not loud, not chaotic, just wrong in a way that settled into the bones. He could not explain it then, only feel it. The officers already there were speaking in low tones, movements controlled, but their eyes carried something heavier, something uncertain. Daniel approached, asking questions, piecing together fragments, a report of a break-in, signs of forced entry, no one inside. At least that was what they believed. The air carried a faint smell, not strong, but enough to linger, something like smoke, something like something that had already happened. Daniel's gaze shifted instinctively toward the house, toward the windows, dark and silent, and for a brief moment, something inside him tightened. An instinct he had learned to trust over the years, but duty moved him forward, pulling him deeper into the night, further away from the place he had left behind. Back at the house, the quiet had not held, not for long. The absence of Daniel had left a space, and in that space, something else had entered, not loud, not reckless, but deliberate. The door had not slammed, it had opened slowly, carefully, a presence moving through shadows rather than against them. Rex had heard it before he saw it. The shift in air, the subtle change in sound that most would miss. His body had risen instantly, muscles tightening, ears forward, every part of him alert, trained not just to react, but to read, to understand. He had moved toward the source, each step measured, controlled, not out of fear, but purpose. The living room had remained dim, the faint glow of the lamp near the shelf casting long shadows across the walls, and there, in that quiet space, something had changed. Rex had seen the movement. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to know it did not belong. His stance had shifted, low and ready, a silent warning carried in posture alone, but the presence did not retreat, it moved, faster now, crossing through the room, and in that motion, something had been disturbed, something important. The small object on the shelf, the locket watch, had fallen, the soft metallic sound barely audible, but Rex heard it, saw it, understood it in a way that went beyond instinct, because he had watched Daniel enough to know its meaning, to know its value. The room changed in that moment, the tension rising, something unseen unfolding too quickly to follow step by step, and then came the shift, the air thickening, a faint haze beginning to form, subtle at first, then growing, the scent stronger now, unmistakable, not yet overwhelming, but present enough to warn of what was coming. Rex's attention snapped back, his focus splitting between the presence and the object on the floor, the locket, lying there, vulnerable, exposed. The presence moved again, retreating now, leaving behind something it had started, something that would not stop on its own. The haze deepened, the light flickering slightly as the room began to lose its stillness. Rex stepped forward, not toward the door, not toward escape, but toward the small object resting on the floor. His movement quick, decisive. He lowered his head, picking it up gently, careful even in urgency, the metal cold against his teeth, and for a brief second, he hesitated, just enough to look toward the doorway where Daniel had stood not long before, and in that pause, something passed through him, something that did not need words, a choice, simple and absolute. The room behind him no longer safe, the air growing heavier, the path to the door uncertain, and yet he did not drop it, did not leave it behind. Instead, with a motion born not of training but of something deeper, something that had been built over years of silent understanding, Rex swallowed, the small locket disappearing from sight, hidden in the only place it could not be taken, not by fire, not by hands that did not understand its worth. And as the room continued to change around him, as the air thickened and the light dimmed, Rex turned, his body low, his movement steady, holding on to the one thing that mattered most, waiting, always waiting, for the moment he could give it back. The memory did not end in noise, it settled into something quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that follows when a moment has already decided its outcome. Rex moved through the thickening air with slow, deliberate steps, each breath shorter now, not from fear, but from the weight of what he carried inside, the locket resting where no one could see it, protected in the only way he knew. The room around him had changed completely, the faint haze now pressing against the walls, the light dimmer, flickering at the edges as if struggling to hold its place. The familiar scent of the house had faded, replaced by something sharper, something that did not belong, and yet Rex did not panic, he did not rush blindly toward the door. Instead he paused, listening, waiting. His body angled low, ready, because instinct told him this was not a moment to act without thought, it was a moment to endure. Back outside, Daniel had moved deeper into the unfolding situation, voices around him rising and falling in controlled urgency, details coming together in fragments, a pattern forming that pointed back toward something intentional, something planned. His focus narrowed, his questions sharper now, but beneath it all, something tugged at him. A quiet unease that he could not name, something pulling his thoughts back toward the place he had left, back toward the silence of his own home. But duty held him in place, as it always had. The night stretched on, minutes folding into each other, and still he stayed, unaware of what had already begun behind him. Inside the house, Rex shifted again, his legs unsteady but determined, the air now heavy enough to press against his chest, each breath requiring more effort than the last. His eyes moved across the room, searching, not for escape, but for something familiar, something that could guide him through the growing uncertainty. The door was there, just a few meters away, a simple path if the air had remained clear, but now it felt distant, obscured, the space between him and safety filled with something unseen yet undeniable. He took a step forward, then another, slow, careful, his body adjusting to the strain, the instinct to protect still stronger than the instinct to retreat. Because this was not just survival, this was responsibility, the kind that had been built over years of standing beside someone who had trusted him without question, the kind that did not break when things became difficult. It held, even when everything else began to fail. The floor beneath him creaked softly as he moved, the sound small but grounding, a reminder that the world was still there beneath the uncertainty. He reached the doorway, pausing again, his head lifting slightly as he drew in another shallow breath. The air outside the room felt marginally clearer, not safe, but better, enough to continue, and so he did, step by step, each movement slower than the last, but still forward, always forward, the house around him now unfamiliar, shadows stretching longer, shapes shifting in ways that made the known feel uncertain. But Rex did not falter, his focus remained fixed, not on the environment, but on the purpose that had already been decided. He would hold on to it, no matter how long it took, no matter how much it asked of him. Back in the present, Daniel's eyes opened slowly, the memory loosening its grip just enough for him to return, but not enough to let go. His hand still rested against Rex's side, feeling the faint rise and fall, the effort behind each breath, and now, with the weight of that night pressing closer than it had in years, something began to connect. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to stir a question that had never been asked, enough to make him look at Rex not just as a companion fading at the end of his life, but as someone who had been carrying something far longer than anyone had realized, something hidden, something protected, something that had never been given the chance to return. And as that thought settled, quiet but persistent, the space between what had been assumed and what might be true began to shift once more, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the first sign of a door that had never been fully closed. The waiting stretched thin, fragile as ice under weight. Daniel did not move, not even when his arms began to ache from holding Rex so carefully, because something had changed and he could feel it now, not in logic but somewhere deeper, somewhere that recognized truth before it was spoken. Rex's breathing remained uneven, each inhale shallow, each exhale slower than the last, but there was still intention in it, still presence, as if he was holding on not for himself, but for something unfinished, something that had waited far too long. Daniel's hand slid gently along Rex's side, feeling the faint tremor beneath his ribs, and for a moment he closed his eyes again, not to return to the memory, but to understand it, to place the pieces that had never fit, because now they were shifting, aligning in a way that made the past feel closer, clearer, the house, the night, the silence he had left behind, and the one thing he had never found again, the locket. He had searched for it in the days that followed, quietly at first, then with a kind of urgency he never spoke about, turning over drawers, checking corners, retracing steps that led nowhere, until eventually he had accepted it as another loss, another small piece taken by a night that had already taken too much. He had never blamed Rex, never even questioned it, because the dog had been there when he returned, weak, shaken, but alive, and that had been enough, more than enough. The rest had faded into something unspoken, something buried beneath routine and time, until now, until this moment where nothing felt accidental anymore. Rex shifted slightly in his arms, a faint tightening through his body that made Daniel look down immediately. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the world narrowed again to just that connection. Something passed between them, not new, but remembered, something that had been there all along, waiting to be understood. Across the room, the faint sound of equipment powering on broke the stillness, the veterinarian moving quickly now, her earlier calm replaced by quiet urgency. The imaging system hummed softly as it came to life, casting a dim blue glow across the adjoining space. She moved with purpose, pulling up the previous scan, her fingers steady but her eyes searching, not for confirmation, but for truth. The image appeared again, the same shape, the same dense shadow that had been labeled as something final, something beyond saving, but now she looked differently, not at the outline, but at the edges, the definition, the way it held form instead of spreading, the way it reflected light in a pattern that did not belong to tissue. Her breath slowed as she leaned closer, adjusting the contrast, zooming in by a few centimeters at a time, the room around her fading as the image sharpened, and then she saw it, not all at once, but piece by piece, a curve that did not belong, a line too precise, too clean, something manufactured, not grown. Her hand hovered over the controls for a moment, then moved again, refining the image further, until the shape revealed Itself, unmistakable now, a small object, metallic, with a hinge. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in realization. She stepped back slightly, the weight of it settling in. "This is not a tumor," she said quietly, the words steady but carrying something deeper, something that changed everything. Daniel looked up, the sentence taking a moment to reach him, to move past the grief and into something else, something uncertain. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low, cautious, as if afraid to disturb whatever this moment was becoming. The veterinarian turned the screen slightly, angling it toward him, her expression no longer clinical, but human, affected. "There is something inside him," she said, choosing each word carefully, "something solid, something that should not be there, and it has been there for a long time." Daniel's gaze shifted to the screen, his mind struggling to follow, to understand what his eyes were seeing. The outline faint but present, a small, defined object where something else had been assumed. His breath slowed, then stopped for just a second, because somewhere deep in his memory, a shape like that already existed, small, familiar, impossible, and in that suspended moment, with Rex still resting against him, still holding on, the distance between the past and the present finally began to collapse, not violently, not suddenly, but with a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. The image did not move, but everything inside Daniel did. Slowly at first, like something waking after a long sleep, his eyes fixed on the screen, tracing the outline again and again as if it might change if he looked long enough, but it did not change. It remained there, small, defined, undeniable. His breath came in shallow now, matching Rex's rhythm without him realizing it. The veterinarian stood beside the monitor, one hand resting lightly against the console, her expression no longer neutral. There was something in her eyes now, something heavier than professional concern, something closer to disbelief. "It is metallic," she said quietly, her voice steady but softer than before, as if the room itself required a different kind of tone now. "It has edges, a hinge, it is not organic." Daniel swallowed slowly, the words settling into him one by one, each one breaking through a layer he had built over years of quiet acceptance. His gaze dropped from the screen back to Rex, to the dog who had never left his side, not once, even when everything else had. "Rex," he whispered, the name carrying more weight than it ever had before. Rex's eyes shifted slightly, still open, still aware. There was no confusion there, no fear, only a quiet steadiness, as if he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Daniel to see what he had been holding all along. Daniel's hand moved gently to Rex's chest, feeling the faint heartbeat beneath, and suddenly the memory returned again, but not as fragments this time, not as distant echoes. It came whole, complete, the night unfolding in full clarity. He remembered stepping back into the house hours later, the air different, heavy in a way he could not explain at the time, the faint smell still lingering, the silence deeper than it should have been. Rex had been there, near the doorway, his body low, breathing uneven, but alive. Daniel had dropped to his knees beside him, hands searching for injury, for anything visible, but there had been nothing obvious, only exhaustion, only a quiet tension that never fully left. He had carried Rex to safety, called for help, done everything by instinct, by training, but he had never asked the question that now pressed against him with undeniable force. What had Rex done while he was gone? The answer was no longer hidden, it was there, on the screen, inside the dog he held now. The locket, the small silver watch that had once rested on the shelf, the last piece of Claire he had left, the one thing he had thought lost to that night. Daniel's breath caught, not from shock alone, but from something deeper, something that felt like recognition and grief colliding at the same time. "It cannot be," he murmured, but the words lacked conviction, because somewhere inside him, he already knew. The veterinarian stepped closer, her voice gentle now, careful. "How long has he been unwell?" she asked, not out of routine, but to understand the weight of what they were seeing. Daniel did not answer immediately, his mind moving through the past weeks, the subtle changes, the way Rex had eaten less, moved slower, the restless nights, the quiet sounds he had made that Daniel had mistaken for pain. "Weeks," he said finally, his voice low, "maybe longer." The veterinarian nodded slowly, her gaze returning to the image, calculating, understanding. If that object has been inside him for that long, it would explain everything, the inflammation, the discomfort, the decline. She paused, her expression tightening slightly, "but it also means something else." Daniel looked up again, his eyes searching hers. What? He asked, almost afraid to hear it. She hesitated, just for a second, then spoke. It means he has been carrying it, enduring it, all this time. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality, heavier than any diagnosis, heavier than any outcome they had prepared for. Daniel's grip on Rex tightened, not out of fear, but out of something closer to awe, something that broke through the grief and reshaped it into something else entirely, something that had always been there but had never been fully understood. Rex shifted slightly in his arms, a small movement, but enough to draw Daniel's attention back to him. Their eyes met again, and this time, there was no question, no uncertainty, only truth, quiet and undeniable. Rex had not been waiting to say goodbye, he had been waiting to give something back. The words did not leave the room quickly, they settled, slow and heavy, as if even the air needed time to understand what had just been revealed. Daniel did not speak, not because he could not, but because something deeper than language had taken hold of him. His hands remained steady around Rex, but inside, everything had begun to shift. The years of quiet grief, the unanswered questions, the small losses he had learned to carry without looking too closely, they were no longer separate, they were connecting now, forming a single line that led back to this moment, back to the dog resting against him, still holding on, still present despite everything his body had endured. Daniel lowered his head again, his forehead gently touching Rex's, the contact soft, deliberate. "You kept it," he whispered, the words barely audible, but they carried a weight that filled the space between them. Rex's breathing remained shallow, but there was a subtle change now, not stronger, not fuller, but calmer, as if something inside him had finally been acknowledged, as if the burden he had carried in silence was no longer his alone. Across the room the veterinarian moved with renewed purpose, her earlier hesitation replaced by quiet urgency. She began preparing for the next step, her hands precise, efficient, but her eyes still returning to Rex, to the dog who had defied every expectation, not through strength alone, but through something far more enduring. She adjusted the equipment, checking measurements, calculating carefully, because this was no longer a question of comfort alone, it was a question of possibility. "We need to remove it," she said, her voice steady, grounding the moment in something practical, something actionable. Daniel lifted his head slightly, his gaze shifting toward her, the words reaching him slowly. "You mean surgery?" he asked, not out of doubt, but to hear it spoken clearly, to anchor it in reality. She nodded once. "Yes, it will not be simple, and he is very weak, but if we leave it there, he will not recover. This is what has been hurting him." She paused briefly, then added, "This is also what has been keeping him here." Daniel's breath caught again, the truth of that statement settling deeper than anything before it. Rex had not just been enduring pain, he had been holding on to purpose, waiting, always waiting. Daniel's hand moved gently along Rex's side, a quiet reassurance. "You hear that, partner?" he said softly, his voice steadier now, shaped by something new, something that felt almost like hope. "We are not done yet." Rex's ear flicked faintly at the sound, a small movement, but enough to say he was still there, still listening. The veterinarian stepped closer, her presence calm but focused. "I need your consent," she said gently. "We have to act soon. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes." Daniel did not hesitate, not this time, the uncertainty that had filled him earlier replaced by clarity, by something that felt certain in a way he had not expected. "Do it," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "whatever it takes." The words hung in the air for a moment, then settled, becoming action. The veterinarian nodded, already turning to prepare, her movements quick but controlled, every detail accounted for, every step measured, because this was no longer routine, this was something else, something that required not just skill, but care beyond the ordinary. Daniel remained where he was, still holding Rex, still close, because he knew this moment mattered, not just for what would come next, but for what had already been revealed, the truth that had lived unseen for so long, the loyalty that had never asked to be noticed, only fulfilled. Rex shifted slightly again, his strength fading but his presence steady, his head resting against Daniel as if it belonged there, as if it always had. And in that quiet space, between preparation and action, between past and what might still be possible, something gentle took root, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, like the first light that does not force its way in, but simply arrives, patient and certain, reminding those who see it that not all endings are final, And not all miracles come in ways we expect. The clinic moved into motion, not with noise, but with purpose, a quiet rhythm that replaced the stillness that had held the room just moments before. The veterinarian's hands worked with practiced precision, preparing instruments, adjusting monitors, every movement measured, every second accounted for. Because time no longer felt distant, it felt immediate, fragile, something that could not be wasted. Daniel remained beside Rex as long as he was allowed, his hand never leaving the dog's side, fingers resting gently against the steady but weakened rise of his chest, as if memorizing the rhythm, committing it to something deeper than memory. "I am right here," he said softly, his voice low but clear, the kind of tone that had guided Rex through years of training, through chaos and calm alike. Rex's eyes flickered slightly, not fully opening, but enough to show he was still aware, still present, the connection between them unbroken even as the moment shifted towards something uncertain. The veterinarian approached, her expression calm but focused. "We need to take him now," she said gently, not as an order, but as a necessity. Daniel nodded slowly, though his hand lingered for just a second longer, reluctant to let go, not out of fear, but because he understood the weight of this moment. The space between what had been and what might still be. He leaned closer, his forehead touching Rex's once more. "Hold on," he whispered, the words simple, but filled with everything he could not say. Then, carefully, he stepped back, allowing the team to move in, to lift Rex with steady hands, supporting his fragile body as they transferred him to the surgical table. The distance between them small, only a few steps, but it felt larger, heavier, as if something essential had been placed just out of reach. Daniel remained where he was, watching, his posture still, his eyes following every movement, not out of control, but out of trust, because that was what this moment required, not action, but faith. The overhead lights shifted, growing brighter, focused, casting a clean, steady glow across the room. The equipment hummed softly as it came to life, monitors blinking awake, their steady tones filling the space with a quiet reassurance. The veterinarian spoke in low, clear instructions, her voice guiding the process, each step deliberate, each action building towards something that could not be rushed. The air carried the faint scent of antiseptic, sharper now, grounding the moment in something real, something tangible. Rex lay still, his body supported, his breathing monitored closely, every detail observed, every change noted, because nothing about this was routine anymore. This was a moment that sat between risk and possibility. Between what had been assumed and what had been revealed. Daniel stepped back further, moving toward the edge of the room, giving space, but never fully leaving, his gaze fixed, his hands now empty, resting at his sides in a way that felt unfamiliar, as if they no longer knew what to do without something to hold. The seconds passed slowly, each one marked not by sound, but by feeling, the weight of waiting, the quiet tension that filled the space between action and outcome. And in that waiting, Daniel's thoughts did not wander, they did not drift into fear or doubt, they remained steady, focused on one thing alone, the truth that had been uncovered, the understanding that Rex had carried something far greater than pain, something that had given purpose to every moment of endurance, something that had led them both here. The veterinarian's hands moved with precision, preparing for the procedure, her eyes sharp, attentive, every detail accounted for, because this was not just about removing an object. It was about preserving something that had been protected at great cost, something that mattered beyond its physical form. The room held its breath again, not in stillness, but in anticipation, as the final preparations came into place. And just before the procedure began, the veterinarian paused briefly, her gaze lifting for a moment, meeting Daniel's across the room. A silent understanding passing between them, no words needed, only acknowledgement, that what lay ahead was uncertain, but necessary, and that sometimes, the smallest objects carry the greatest weight, not because of what they are made of, but because of what they hold. And in that quiet exchange, as the moment shifted once more from waiting to action, the line between past and present blurred completely, leaving only one truth standing clear, that this was not the end, not yet. Not while something still remained to be returned. The moment did not begin with sound, it began with stillness, the kind that settles just before something irreversible takes place. The surgical lights cast a steady glow over Rex's body, illuminating every careful movement, every precise adjustment. The veterinarian stood at the center, her hands steady, her focus absolute, the world beyond the room fading into something distant and irrelevant, because everything that mattered was here. Contained within a space no larger than a few square meters, the monitors spoke in quiet tones, steady, consistent, each pulse a reminder that Rex was still holding on, still present despite the weight he had carried for so long. Daniel stood just beyond the sterile boundary, his posture unmoving, his eyes fixed, not on the instruments, not on the procedure itself, but on Rex, always on Rex, as if looking away for even a second might somehow break the fragile thread that still connected them. Time moved differently here. Not in minutes or seconds, but in breaths, in small shifts, in the quiet progression of something that could not be rushed. The veterinarian worked with careful precision, each motion deliberate, guided not only by training but by something deeper, something that understood the significance of what lay beneath the surface. This was not simply about removing a foreign object, it was about uncovering a truth that had been hidden in silence, protected at a cost that no one had seen until now. The first stage passed without interruption, each step aligning as expected, the tension in the room easing only slightly, never fully releasing, because uncertainty still lingered at the edges. Waiting, the veterinarian paused briefly, her eyes narrowing as she reached the point where the anomaly had been located, the place where the scan had revealed something that did not belong. Her movement slowed, becoming even more precise, more deliberate, because this was where assumption ended and reality began. The room seemed to lean in, every presence attuned to the same quiet moment, and then she saw it, not all at once, but gradually, a small glint beneath the surface, something that reflected the light in a way that organic tissue never could. Her breath caught, just slightly, enough to mark the moment, enough to confirm what had already been suspected. There it is, she said softly, her voice calm but carrying a weight that filled the space. Daniel's breath stopped for a fraction of a second, his eyes fixed on the point she indicated, though he could not see it clearly from where he stood. He did not need to, because something inside him already knew. The veterinarian continued, her hands steady, her movements careful, because this was no longer routine, this was delicate, intentional, each step taken with an awareness that what she was uncovering was more than an object, it was something that had been protected, preserved, carried through pain and time. She adjusted her approach, ensuring that nothing would be disturbed unnecessarily, that the object would remain intact, because it mattered, not just medically, but emotionally, in a way that extended far beyond the room. The glint became clearer, the shape more defined, a small curve, a hinge, unmistakable now, the outline of something familiar, something that did not belong to this place, and yet had remained here for far too long. Daniel's hands tightened slightly at his sides, his breath shallow but steady, his mind no longer searching, no longer questioning, only recognizing, the years between then and now collapsing into a single line, leading directly to this moment. The veterinarian reached carefully, her fingers guided by both precision and respect, and as she began to free the object from where it had rested, the room seemed to hold its breath once more, not out of fear, but out of something quieter, something closer to reverence. Because what was being uncovered was not just a hidden truth, it was a promise kept, and in that fragile, suspended moment, as the small object finally began to emerge into the light, the distance between loss and return vanished completely, leaving only one undeniable truth behind, that some acts of loyalty do not end when they are unseen, they endure, quietly, patiently, until the moment they are finally understood. The object did not emerge all at once, it revealed itself slowly, as if even it carried the weight of the years it had been hidden. The veterinarian's hands remained steady, guiding it carefully into the light, every movement deliberate, every second stretched thin with quiet anticipation. The metallic surface caught the overhead glow, reflecting it in a soft, muted shimmer that did not belong to anything natural, and yet there it was, undeniable, real, a small photo locket watch, worn but intact, its delicate hinge still closed, its shape unmistakable. The room did not react loudly, there were no sudden movements, no sharp sounds, only a shift in the air, subtle but profound, as if something long buried had finally been allowed to breathe again. The veterinarian held it gently, pausing for just a moment before setting it aside with the same care she had used to uncover it, because this was not just an object, it was something carried, protected, endured. Daniel felt it before he fully saw it, the recognition settling into him like a quiet wave, not crashing, not overwhelming, but steady, certain, his eyes fixed on the small piece of metal now resting on the sterile surface, his breath uneven, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that had been waiting for years to find its way back. His mind did not need to search anymore. It knew, the curve of it, the size, the way it caught the light. It was hers, it had always been hers, Claire's locket, the one he had thought lost. The one he had mourned in silence, believing it had disappeared into that night along with everything else he could not hold on to. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, not from weakness, but from the sudden weight of understanding. Across the room, the veterinarian continued her work, her focus returning to Rex, because the procedure was not finished, not yet. The object had been removed, but the damage it had caused still required care, still required attention. Her movements remained precise, steady, guided by training but softened by the knowledge of what she had just uncovered. This was no longer just a procedure, it was something more, something that demanded respect. The monitors continued their quiet rhythm, each steady tone a reminder that Rex was still there, still fighting in his own silent way. Daniel stepped closer, not crossing the boundary, but near enough to see more clearly now, his gaze moving between Rex and the locket, the connection between them no longer invisible, no longer hidden behind assumption or time. "You kept it safe," he whispered, his voice low, almost breaking, but held together by something stronger than grief, something closer to gratitude. Rex did not respond in movement, not yet, but the steady line of his breathing remained, the quiet proof that he was still holding on, still present in this moment where everything was finally being understood. The veterinarian worked carefully, ensuring stability, ensuring that nothing had been overlooked, because now the goal was no longer just to uncover, it was to preserve, to give Rex the chance he had earned through endurance alone. The room remained quiet, not empty, but full in a way that words could not fully describe, full of meaning, of connection, of something that had been invisible until now. And as the final steps of the procedure began to take shape, as the tension slowly eased into something steadier, something more certain, Daniel's gaze returned to the small object resting nearby, and for the first time in years, it did not feel lost, it did not feel like something taken, it felt like something returned, not by chance, not by luck, but by a choice made in a moment no one had witnessed, a choice carried forward through pain and time, until it could finally be placed back where it belonged. And in that quiet realization, as the line between past and present settled into something whole, Daniel understood something he had never fully grasped before, that loyalty does not always announce itself, it does not ask to be seen, it simply remains, enduring, waiting, until the moment it can be given back. The room did not erupt into relief, it softened, slowly, like tension releasing its grip one careful breath at a time. The veterinarian continued her work with steady hands, guiding the procedure toward completion, ensuring that what had been endured would not be undone in this final stretch. The monitors remained consistent, their quiet tones no longer counting down, but holding steady, each pulse a fragile promise that Rex was still there, still within reach. Daniel did not move closer, but he did not step away either, his presence anchored just beyond the sterile line, his eyes shifting between Rex and the small locket resting on the tray, the distance between them now filled with something different, not loss, not absence, but return, the kind that does not announce itself loudly, but settles deep, undeniable. The veterinarian adjusted her position slightly, her focus narrowing once more as she completed the final stages, her movements precise, controlled, guided by both skill and care, because now the objective had changed. It was no longer about discovery, it was about recovery, about giving Rex the chance to come back from what he had carried for so long. Daniel's breath slowed, matching the rhythm of the room, his thoughts no longer racing, no longer searching. They had found what they needed. The question that had lingered for years had been answered, not with words, but with something far more enduring, something that had been held in silence until it could no longer remain hidden. Rex lay still beneath the light, his body supported, his breathing assisted, every detail monitored. But even in that stillness, there was presence, something unmistakable, something that had not faded despite everything. The veterinarian stepped back slightly, her gaze moving over the instruments, the readings, the small details that confirmed stability, and then she allowed herself a brief pause, a quiet exhale that carried both relief and something deeper, something closer to reverence. She glanced toward Daniel, her expression softer now, not just professional, but human. "He is holding," she said gently, the words simple, but they carried weight. Daniel nodded once, the motion small but meaningful, his eyes never leaving Rex. "He always does," he replied, his voice steady, not out of certainty, but out of something earned over years of standing beside a partner who had never let go. The veterinarian gave a faint, understanding nod before returning to the final checks, because this moment, though quieter now, still required care, still demanded attention. Time moved forward again, not in leaps, but in small, steady steps, the procedure nearing its end, the tension easing into something more grounded, something that felt like possibility. Daniel's gaze shifted once more to the locket, its surface catching the light in a way that felt almost familiar, as if it recognized its place in this moment. He stepped slightly closer, just enough to see it more clearly, his hand lifting instinctively before stopping short. Not yet, not until everything was certain, not until Rex had been given the same chance he had given to something else all those years ago. The veterinarian completed the final step, her hands moving with quiet assurance as she ensured everything was secure, everything stable, and then, finally, she stepped back, the process complete, the room settling into a different kind of silence now, not the silence of endings, but the silence that follows when something has been given a chance to begin again. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him in a way that felt heavier, fuller, as if it carried more than just air. His shoulders eased slightly, though his focus remained unwavering, because this moment was not about relief alone, it was about understanding, about seeing clearly what had been hidden for so long. Rex had not simply endured, he had chosen, he had carried, he had protected something that did not belong to him, simply because it mattered to someone he trusted, and in doing so, he had given Daniel something back that he had long believed was gone, something that could not be replaced. Only returned. And now, as the room settled into quiet once more, as the line between past and present finally came to rest, Daniel understood that what had happened here was not just survival, it was something deeper, something that did not need to be explained, only felt, a quiet reminder that even in the smallest acts, even in the silence of moments no one else sees, loyalty has a way of enduring, waiting, and when the time is right, finding its way home. The light in the room softened as the procedure came to its quiet conclusion, not dimmer, but gentler, as if it no longer needed to press so hard against uncertainty. The veterinarian removed her gloves with slow, deliberate care, placing them aside before stepping closer to Rex once more, her gaze attentive, watching the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the small, steady signals that meant he was still there, still holding. Daniel remained where he was, but something in his posture had changed, not relaxed, not yet, but steadier. As if the ground beneath him had finally stopped shifting, his eyes moved from Rex to the locket again, the small object resting quietly now, no longer hidden, no longer carried in silence, but present, returned, real. He took a step forward, just one, closing the distance that had felt so much larger moments before, his hand lifting slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of respect, as if he understood that this was not simply something to be taken back, it was something to be received. His fingers touched the cool surface of the locket, the metal familiar even after all this time, worn smooth in the same places, shaped by years that had not erased what it held. He lifted it carefully, the weight slight, but the meaning immeasurable. His breath caught again, not sharply this time, but softly, like something settling into place. The room remained quiet, giving space to the moment without interruption. Daniel's thumb brushed lightly along the edge before he paused, his hand steady, his gaze fixed on the small hinge. There was no urgency now, no need to rush, because this moment had already waited years to arrive, and it would not be lost in seconds. Slowly, gently, he opened it, the hinge giving way with a faint, familiar resistance. And inside, just as it had always been, was the photograph, small, delicate, but clear, Claire's face looking back at him with the same quiet warmth that had once filled every corner of his life. The sight of it did not break him, it did not shatter the composure he had held for so long. Instead it settled into him, deep and steady, like something returning to where it had always belonged. His eyes softened, not with grief alone, but with something fuller, something that carried both loss and presence at the same time. "You found your way back," he whispered. Not to the object, but to everything it represented, to the memory, to the connection, to the part of his life that had never truly left, just been waiting. The veterinarian watched quietly, her expression respectful, understanding that this moment belonged to something beyond the clinical, beyond the procedure. It belonged to a bond that had been revealed in the most unexpected way. Rex remained still, but his breathing had changed, not stronger, not fully, but more even, more settled, as if the tension that had once lived beneath it had begun to ease. Daniel lowered himself slightly, bringing the locket closer, holding it where Rex could sense it, where the faint movement of air might carry its presence. "It is here," he said softly, his voice calm, steady. "You did it." The words were simple, but they carried everything: acknowledgement, gratitude, understanding. Rex's ear flicked faintly, a small movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to show that something had reached him, that the connection had completed its circle. The veterinarian stepped forward once more, her voice gentle. "He will need time now," she said quietly, "rest, careful monitoring, but he has a chance." Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Rex. "He always deserved one," he replied, his voice carrying a quiet certainty that no longer needed to be questioned. The room settled again, not into silence, but into something deeper, something that felt like peace, not complete, not final, but present, real, the kind that does not erase what has been lost, but allows it to exist alongside what has been returned. Daniel closed the locket carefully, holding it in his palm for a moment longer before placing it gently against his chest, near his heart, where it had always belonged. And as he looked back at Rex, at the dog who had carried it through darkness, through pain, through time, he understood something that did not need explanation, that some bonds are not measured in moments or years, but in choices, in quiet acts of loyalty that ask for nothing in return. And in that understanding, as the morning light settled fully across the room, Daniel did not see an ending. He saw something else entirely, something that had been waiting all along, not to be found, but to be given back. The clinic did not feel the same anymore, not after everything that had been uncovered, not after something once thought lost had quietly found its way back. The air carried a different weight now, lighter in some places, deeper in others, as if the room itself had witnessed something it would not forget. Rex lay resting under careful observation, his breathing steadier than before, still fragile, still uncertain, but no longer slipping away. The quiet rhythm of the monitors now felt less like a countdown, and more like a promise, each soft tone marking not an end, but a continuation. Daniel remained beside him, closer now, no longer held back by hesitation or fear, his hand resting gently against Rex's side once again, feeling the warmth, the presence, the life that had refused to fade even when everything pointed toward loss. "You stubborn old partner," he murmured softly, the words carrying a faint trace of something lighter, something almost like a smile that had been absent for far too long. Rex's ear twitched slightly at the sound, a small, almost invisible response, but enough to say he was still listening, still there. The veterinarian moved quietly in the background, adjusting settings, reviewing notes, her movements efficient but unhurried now, the urgency replaced by careful attention, by patience. Because recovery would not be immediate, it would come in small steps, measured in hours, in days, not moments. She glanced toward Daniel and Rex briefly, her expression calm, thoughtful, as if she understood that what had happened here went beyond medicine, beyond diagnosis. It was something that could not be measured, only witnessed. Daniel's other hand rested near his chest, where the locket now lay secured, close, where it belonged, the weight of it familiar again, but different too, no longer tied only to absence, but to something returned, something proven. He had spent years believing that night had taken everything from him, piece by piece, quietly, without warning, but now he understood that something had remained, something had endured in silence, carried not by memory alone, but by a living, breathing bond that had never once broken. He looked down at Rex again, studying the lines of his face, the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the quiet strength that still lingered beneath the surface. "I should have known," he whispered, not with regret, but with recognition, because Rex had always been that way, always watching, always protecting, even when no one asked, even when no one saw. Time moved slowly through the room, the outside world continuing as it always did, cars passing on snow-lined streets, people stepping into their day without knowing that something extraordinary had just unfolded within these walls. But inside, the pace was different, softer, each moment allowed to settle, to be understood fully before the next arrived. Rex shifted slightly, a small movement that drew Daniel's attention instantly, his head turning, his hand adjusting gently to support him. "Easy," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady, grounding, the way it had always been. Rex's eyes opened just a fraction more this time, not fully, but enough to catch the light, enough to meet Daniel's gaze once again, and in that brief, fragile connection, everything that had been hidden, everything that had been endured, felt complete, not finished, but fulfilled. Daniel did not speak again, he did not need to, because some moments do not ask for words, they exist fully on their own, carried in a look, in a presence, in the quiet understanding between two souls that have walked too far together to ever truly be separated. The veterinarian stepped closer once more, checking Rex's condition with careful hands, her voice low, reassuring. "He is responding," she said. Not with excitement, but with quiet confidence. Daniel nodded, his gaze never leaving Rex. "Of course he is," he replied softly, and this time, there was no doubt in his voice, none at all, because what had been revealed here had changed something fundamental, not just in the outcome of this moment, but in the way he understood everything that had come before it. And as the light from the window grew brighter, settling fully into the room, Daniel realized that this was not just a second chance. It was something deeper, something earned, something given through loyalty. That had never once asked to be seen, only to be kept, until the moment it could finally be returned. The morning did not arrive all at once, it unfolded gently, light slipping through the frosted glass and settling across the quiet room where everything had changed without ever raising its voice. Rex lay resting beneath the soft hum of the monitors, his breathing steadier now, still fragile, still watched closely, but no longer fading into something final. The rhythm of his chest carried a quiet persistence, the kind that does not demand attention, only continues. Daniel sat beside him, closer than before, one hand resting lightly against his side, the other near his chest where the locket remained, its presence no longer a memory but something real, something returned, something that had crossed through time and pain to find its way back. He had not moved much in the past hour, not because he could not, but because he did not need to. Everything that mattered was here, within reach, within sight, within understanding. The veterinarian passed quietly in the background, checking readings, making notes, her steps measured, her presence steady. She did not interrupt, did not speak unless necessary, because she understood that this moment belonged to something beyond her role, something that had already been shaped long before anyone in this room had recognized it. Daniel's gaze remained fixed on Rex, watching the small changes, the subtle shifts that marked the beginning of something new. Rex's ear twitched again, a little stronger this time, his head moving just slightly as if adjusting to the weight of rest rather than the strain of holding on. Daniel leaned forward, his voice soft but clear. "You can rest now," he said, not as a command, but as permission, something given freely, something earned. Rex's eyes opened a fraction more, the dark gaze still gentle, still steady, meeting Daniel's for just a moment longer than before, and in that brief connection, there was no urgency, no struggle, only presence, only understanding. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him with a sense of quiet completion, not because everything was resolved, but because what needed to be known had finally been revealed. He reached for the locket again, his fingers wrapping around it with a familiarity that felt both old and new, and this time, when he opened it, he did not do so with hesitation. He did not brace himself, he simply looked, allowing the image inside to exist as it was, unchanged, steady, Claire's smile still holding the same warmth, the same quiet strength that had once carried him through everything. He kept it safe, Daniel murmured, not to the room, not even to Rex alone, but to the memory itself, to the part of his life that had never truly been lost, only protected in a way he had never imagined. The room remained still, the light steady, the world outside continuing in its quiet rhythm, unaware of the small miracle that had unfolded within these walls. The veterinarian approached once more, her voice low, respectful. "He will need time, but he is stable," she said, the words simple, but they carried something deeper, something that acknowledged not just the outcome, but the journey that had led to it. Daniel nodded, his gaze returning to Rex. "We have time," he replied softly, and this time, the words felt true in a way they had not before. Because time was no longer something slipping away, it was something given, something held, something that could be shared again. Rex shifted once more, settling deeper into rest, his breathing even, his body no longer fighting against something unseen. The burden he had carried finally gone, the purpose he had held fulfilled. Daniel remained beside him, his presence steady, his hand still resting gently against the life that had never once turned away. And in that quiet space, where nothing needed to be said, where nothing needed to be proven, something settled into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a calm certainty that did not require explanation, that sometimes, the greatest acts of love are not the ones we witness, not the ones we understand in the moment, but the ones that endure in silence, waiting patiently, until the day they can finally be returned, whole, unchanged, and placed back into the hands of the one they were always meant for.